Alabama, 1987. Walter McMillian, known as Johnny D to his friends, works in the woods until late evening. Afterward, he returns home to his wife and 3 children. This time, however, he doesn't make it home. Police stop Walter on the road, but it's not a routine check. Several patrol cars with flashing lights surround him. He stays calm until one of the officers hints at his affair with a white woman. That's when Johnny D realizes something is seriously wrong. Soon, news broadcasts across all channels announce that a suspect has been arrested for the murder of young Rhonda Morrison. And that suspect is Johnny D. The jury sentences Johnny D to life in prison, but the judge overrules it, giving him the death penalty instead. Harvard law student Bryan Stevenson visits the prison to meet an innocent man named Davis. The 2 men are close in age and share many similarities, leading to a conversation that lasts over 2 hours, far longer than allowed. The guard is not pleased. When Stevenson witnesses the harsh punishment inflicted on the inmate, he realizes he must turn down a prestigious job offer and move to Alabama to help people like Davis. Bryan's parents don't support his decision. His mother urges him to think carefully before going to a state where people like him are still treated with prejudice. She also fears that his fight for justice will make him many enemies, putting him in danger. Upon arriving in town, Bryan heads straight to the office where he plans to open his legal practice. However, he walks in on his assistant, Eva, in the middle of a heated argument with the landlord. After learning that the firm will be defending black inmates on death row, the building owners refuse to rent them an office. With nowhere else to stay, Eva takes Bryan to her home and tells him about the many strange cases she has handled in the city. False testimonies and blatantly fabricated criminal charges and sentences are far more common than they should be. Stevenson takes on his first 6 clients from the prison and goes to meet them. Although lawyers are usually exempt from searches, the guards make their attitude clear by forcing Bryan, a black attorney, to go through a full inspection, even making him remove all his clothing. The first inmate he meets is Herbert, who admits his guilt and doesn't try to deny the charges. However, the court ignored both his military service and his mental health issues, sentencing him to death. Bryan is determined to change that. Stevenson meets with several more inmates before finally sitting down with Johnny D. From the start, Johnny D makes it clear that he doesn't want to talk. His last lawyer took all the money his family could gather and then disappeared without doing anything to help his case. Back in his cell, Walter continues studying state laws on his own, relying only on himself. At the same time, he helps calm his fellow inmates by encouraging them to imagine places they've always dreamed of visiting, keeping their minds off their fate. Meanwhile, at Eva's house, Stevenson stays up all night reading through criminal cases from recent years. The deeper he digs into the records, the more he realizes the extent of the injustice against black people, orchestrated by the sheriff and the judge. But what worries Bryan the most is McMillian's case, as the entire accusation is based on the testimony of 2 witnesses. Ralph Myers supposedly spent the night of the tragedy with Walter, but somehow didn't run away when he had the chance. Myers had spent most of his life in prison and was currently serving time for another crime, though he received the lightest sentence possible for it. The second witness, Bill Hawks, claimed to have seen Walter's truck at the dry cleaners during the tragedy. Stevenson meets with Tommy Chapman, the prosecutor who had been a public defender just a year ago. Bryan hopes that Chapman will be interested in a fair investigation, but the prosecutor shows no willingness to cooperate, and Bryan is unable to obtain the full case files. As he gathers information around town and inspects the crime scene, Stevenson notices that the sheriff is constantly watching him. That evening, Bryan visits Johnny D's family, where all the neighbors are already waiting for him. Everyone insists that Walter couldn't have committed the crime and that the charges against him are simply revenge for his affair with the victim months before. Additionally, one of the neighbors, a young man named Donald, spent the entire day with Bill Hawks in the workshop, but he's afraid to speak out because the local police could fabricate false charges against anyone. Stevenson returns to the prison to meet with Johnny D again, and this time, Johnny agrees to work with the lawyer, as he now has hope for his case to be reopened. Before agreeing, Johnny D asks Bryan why he's doing all of this. A small, rundown town, and working for free with inmates. What's the point? Bryan, recalling his own childhood, explains that he understands what it's like to wait for justice, only to face indifference because of his race. Herbert is given an execution date. His fellow inmates try to offer support, while Stevenson works on preparing an appeal. However, Herbert has already come to terms terms with his fate. One night, Eva's phone rings. The caller on the other end warns that there's a device planted in her house, and if she doesn't stop helping the arrogant lawyer, serious trouble will await her and her family. Bryan suggests that Eva back down, but she refuses to give in to the blackmailers. The young attorneys continue to seek more information from the locals about McMillian's case, but almost everyone refuses to speak, terrified and constantly looking over their shoulders. To protect Eva's family, Stevenson rents a house, turning it into the office for his firm. From there, the couple continues their work, assisting inmates across the state. Bryan receives a call from the young man, who could confirm that Bill Hawks couldn't have seen Walter's truck at the dry cleaners. In retaliation, the man is charged with giving false testimony and is detained for several days pending investigation. Donald warns the lawyer that he refuses to help Johnny D, as he doesn't want to end up behind bars himself. Stevenson goes to the sheriff's office to find out on what grounds the young man was detained, but he's quickly made to understand that this fight is pointless. On his way home that night, the police stop him once again and clearly remind him that it's time to stop digging into local matters, or he might face serious trouble himself. Stevenson visits Walter and is relieved to see that his client hasn't lost hope. The inmate continues to study criminal law and even manages to joke around. After meeting with his client, Stevenson sits down with Myers, the main witness. In a private conversation, Myers admits that he testified against Johnny D to get a reduced sentence, but he wasn't told that his old friend would be sentenced to death. At one point, Myers hesitates, but ultimately refuses to repeat his confession in court. Through the court, the lawyer gains access to the archives, where he finds a recording of Myers' interrogation. Myers refuses to lie, but is left with no other choice. With Eva's help, Stevenson gathers enough evidence to push for the case to be reopened. Meanwhile, Herbert cries in his cell, knowing that he will soon be led to the electric chair. Johnny D comforts his friend, promising to be with him in spirit when it happens. When Stevenson learns that Herbert's case won't be reopened in time, he tells Eva he's going to visit his client to offer him support in his final moments. To support their friend, the inmates bang their metal cups against the bars, creating a sound that echoes all the way to the main hall. Herbert walks to his fate, hearing the solidarity of his fellow prisoners. Stevenson returns, feeling defeated, and realizes that he must save Walter. Otherwise, he won't be able to live with the knowledge that an innocent man is facing the same unjust punishment. The lawyer returns to Myers and tells him he has heard the audio recording. He reminds the inmate that because of his actions, the father of 3 children could suffer. Stevenson gives him time to think, but urges him to make the right choice and finally tell the truth. A court hearing is scheduled, and Myers decides to testify. At first, he hesitates, but when he looks into the eyes of the friend he falsely accused, he gives truthful testimony, declaring that he was not with Walter at the dry cleaners the night of the crime. Stevenson presents a wealth of new evidence and witnesses that confirm Walter's innocence in the death of the girl. The judge orders a recess to review the new information. During this time, a guard gives Walter permission to speak with his family for a few minutes, something he hasn't been allowed to do in all 6 years behind bars. After the break, the judge announces his decision to disregard the new evidence and return McMillian to his cell until the execution. The verdict shocks everyone, and Walter's son can't take it anymore, causing an uproar in the courtroom. At first, Bryan feels as though the case is lost, but after speaking with Walter, who remains upbeat despite the circumstances, the young lawyer decides to continue the fight. He prepares an appeal to the Supreme Court, hoping to bring in as many outside judges and prosecutors as possible to draw attention to the case. Bryan also brings the media into the spotlight, appearing on a popular show to discuss McMillian's case. After several months, the Supreme Court responds, announcing that they are overturning the original verdict and are ready to reconsider McMillian's case. However, the joy is short-lived when Bryan receives a document from Chapman, who requests a delay in the Supreme Court hearing to stall the process. Bryan goes to the prosecutor's home, asking that, if he can't help in the pursuit of justice, at least he not hinder the case and allow for a new hearing. Chapman hints that Bryan shouldn't come onto his private property again, or he'll find a way to deal with the persistent attorney. The court date is set. At the start of the hearing, the prosecutor is expected to reject the review of the case, but unexpectedly Chapman agrees. The hearing lasts for hours, with the Supreme Court judge carefully reviewing all the evidence, witness testimonies, and the grounds for the initial conviction. After several hours, the judge delivers a verdict of acquittal and orders Walter McMillian's release directly from the courtroom. In disbelief at their victory, Johnny D breaks down in tears, overwhelmed by emotion. When Walter returns to his cell to collect his belongings, his fellow inmates bid him farewell, banging metal cups against the bars. After the hearing, Walter McMillian begins working alongside Stevenson. Having gained valuable knowledge during his time in prison, Walter becomes an excellent assistant to the lawyer. Together, they manage to imprison the corrupt judge and sheriff, responsible for sending many innocent people to the electric chair. Thanks to the young lawyer and his client, many who had lost hope of finding justice are set free. What do you think of the movie Just Mercy? Share your thoughts in the comments.